The day billionaire Ethan Carter interviewed his 17th nanny candidate, he was ready to give up, not because he couldn't afford the best help money could buy, but because none of them understood the one thing his family desperately needed. They didn't need a nanny. They needed someone who could heal a broken home after losing his wife. 3 years earlier, in a tragic car accident, Ethan had become one of the youngest self-made billionaires in New York. He built companies that employed thousands of people and made headlines around the world. But behind the glass walls of his luxurious penthouse lived a man who felt like a complete failure every time his 6-year-old daughter cried herself to sleep asking for her mother. Little Sophie Carter had stopped smiling. She barely spoke to strangers, refused to attend birthday parties, and carried her mother's old scarf everywhere she went. The expensive therapists couldn't reach her. The private tutors couldn't comfort her. And every nanny Ethan hired quit within weeks, because Sophie didn't trust anyone, and neither did Ethan. Before we continue this emotional story, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to Kindness of Power, and share it with someone who believes kindness can change lives. Also, tell us in the comments, which city and country are you watching from? We'd love to know where our amazing community is growing around the world. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, Ethan almost canceled his final interview. The applicant's resume was unusually simple. No elite nanny academy. No celebrity clients. No impressive recommendations from wealthy families. Her name was Grace Miller, 32 years old. Former elementary school teacher. Volunteer at children's hospitals. That was it. When Grace walked into Ethan's office wearing a simple blue dress and carrying an umbrella that looked older than some of his luxury watches, Ethan immediately knew she wasn't what he had asked his agency to send. "You've worked with billionaires before?" Ethan asked. Grace smiled politely. "No." "Do you know how to manage household staff?" "No." "Have you ever worked in a home this large?" "No." Ethan sighed quietly. This interview was going exactly as he feared. Then Grace asked something no other nanny had ever asked. "May I ask how your daughter is feeling today?" The question caught Ethan off guard. "She's fine," he answered automatically. Grace gently smiled. "No, Mr. Carter. Children who lose their mothers aren't simply fine." For the first time in months, someone wasn't talking to him like a billionaire. She was talking to him like a father. Instead of discussing salary or benefits, Grace spent the rest of the interview asking about Sophie, her favorite books, what made her laugh, and whether she still slept with the lights on at night. Finally, Ethan asked, "Why do you want this job?" Grace looked down at the family photo sitting on his desk. "When I was 9 years old, I lost my father," she said softly. "People spent years telling me to be strong. No one ever told me it was okay to be sad. If I can help one little girl feel less alone, then that's why I'm here." Against his better judgment, Ethan hired her. The first week was a disaster. Sophie refused to speak to Grace. She hid behind doors and ignored every attempt to connect. One afternoon, she even threw her crayons across the room and shouted, "You're not my mommy! Stop pretending!" The entire house fell silent. Everyone expected Grace to quit. Instead, she quietly sat on the floor and said something that surprised everyone. "You're right," Grace said gently. "I'm not your mommy, and I will never try to replace her. She's special. No one can." Sophie's angry expression softened slightly. Grace continued, "But if you'd like, I can simply be your friend until you're ready." That night, Sophie left a small drawing outside Grace's bedroom door. It was the first sign of trust anyone had seen in years. Slowly, things began to change. Grace introduced bedtime stories, pancake Saturdays, and evening walks in the nearby park. She encouraged Sophie to talk about her mother instead of avoiding painful memories. Soon, laughter returned to the Carter home. But Grace noticed something Ethan refused to admit. The person hurting most wasn't Sophie, it was Ethan himself. Every morning, he buried himself in work before sunrise. Every evening, he returned home emotionally exhausted. He never attended school events and rarely smiled. One night, Grace found him sitting alone in the library, staring at an old photograph of his wife. "You miss her," she said softly. "Every single day." Ethan replied. Then why are you pretending you don't? The question stayed with him for weeks. Grace wasn't just helping Sophie heal. She was quietly teaching Ethan that grief wasn't weakness. Months passed, and the Carter family began feeling whole again. Until one evening, Grace overheard something that changed everything. While preparing Sophie's school bag, she accidentally heard two senior employees arguing in Ethan's office. One of them mentioned suspicious financial transactions involving millions of dollars hidden through company accounts. At first, Grace thought she had misunderstood, but something about their conversation troubled her deeply. She knew Ethan trusted his executive team completely. What she didn't know was that someone close to him had been stealing from him for years, and they were willing to destroy his reputation and family to protect their secret. Grace had come into their lives to care for a little girl. She never imagined she would soon become the only person standing between the Carter family and complete devastation. Grace couldn't ignore what she had heard. For several days, she quietly observed the unusual behavior of Ethan's longtime business partner, Richard Hale. He was always overly friendly around Ethan, but strangely cold whenever Grace entered the room. One afternoon, Sophie accidentally mentioned something alarming. "Mr. Richard told Daddy he's too busy for me," she whispered sadly. Grace frowned. "When did he say that?" "Lots of times," Sophie replied. "He says Daddy should focus on work because that's what Mommy would want." Grace immediately realized someone had been manipulating Ethan emotionally for years. Richard wasn't just stealing money from the company. He was slowly isolating Ethan from the people who loved him. Determined to protect the family, Grace gathered evidence discreetly. During a charity event at Ethan's mansion, she overheard Richard discussing offshore accounts with another executive. She carefully noted every detail and encouraged Ethan to review his financial records himself. At first, Ethan refused to believe her. "Richard has been my friend for 15 years, he said firmly. Grace looked at him with sincere concern. "Sometimes the people closest to us are the hardest to." "A question," she replied gently. That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. Something about Grace's voice reminded him that she had never once asked him for anything. Not money, not status, not favors. She only cared about protecting his daughter and his family. For the first time in years, he decided to trust someone completely. After hiring independent forensic accountants, Ethan discovered an elaborate fraud scheme worth over $40 million. Richard had manipulated contracts, transferred funds overseas, and planned to force Ethan out of his own company. During an upcoming board vote, the betrayal nearly destroyed him, but what hurt? Even more was discovering that Richard had deliberately encouraged Ethan's unhealthy obsession with work because it made him easier to control. Grace had uncovered what dozens of highly paid advisors had missed. She had saved his company. More importantly, she had saved his family. The investigation became national news. Reporters camped outside Ethan's home. Investors demanded answers. Sophie's school classmates began asking uncomfortable questions. It was an incredibly difficult time for the Carter family. Yet through it all, Grace remained their quiet source of strength. One evening, Sophie climbed onto Ethan's lap and asked, "Daddy, are we going to lose our home?" Ethan smiled through tears. "No, sweetheart," he said, "because someone very special reminded me that family is more important than anything else." Months later, after the legal battle ended successfully, Ethan stood in his living room watching Sophie and Grace bake cookies together. The once silent mansion was now filled with laughter. Something had changed, not just in Sophie, but in him. He realized that success had never been about billions of dollars or magazine covers. Success was sitting at the dinner table hearing his daughter laugh. It was learning to grieve without shame. It was allowing kindness to heal wounds that money never could. One snowy December evening, Ethan invited Grace to the rooftop garden overlooking the city skyline. "I've spent years trying to protect my family," he said quietly. "But the truth is, you've been protecting us all along." Grace smiled warmly. "You protected them too, Ethan," she replied. "You just forgot that fathers need saving sometimes." He handed her a small framed photograph. It showed Sophie smiling brighter than she had in years, holding both Ethan's and Grace's hands. On the back of the frame were 4 simple words: "You gave us home." Grace couldn't hold back her tears. She came looking for a job. Instead, she found a family, and Ethan learned one of life's greatest lessons, that sometimes the people who save us don't arrive wearing expensive suits or carrying impressive resumes. Sometimes they arrive carrying an old umbrella and a heart full of kindness. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to Kindness of Power and become part of our growing family of kindness lovers around the world. Like this video, share it with someone who needs a little hope today, and remember, sometimes one act of kindness can save an entire family. Thank you for listening, and don't forget to tell us in the comments which city and country you're watching from. Your story matters too.